Good morning, guys. It is Monday, February 19th, 2024. This is Bathrobe Business. I'm Georgi Oganov. I got my coffee and I got the news. So I missed three videos last week. So for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I did not have any posts. It was kind of a crazy week between Valentine's Day, stuff I had to do for business, and I have an upcoming trip at the end of this week. So post Thursday, I will not have a video. So I will not have a video Thursday and Friday this week either. So I'm just going to report on mostly today's stories. I don't think there's much purpose to go back other than the PPI data. So this is essentially wholesale data. Inflation there as well. So there was inflation in that market as well, in addition to core CPI that we saw last week. So inflation is still rampant. I know I kind of beat a dead horse when I talk about that, but I just kind of want to make sure that I do cover it. So inflation is still rampant, which is why I say there are not going to be rate cuts anytime soon. I don't think that there's enough market fundamentals to warrant a rate cut. There's still tons of inflation. Job hiring is still at record highs. Unemployment is still at record lows. We have increase in prices in everything from homes to insurance to groceries to now wholesale data. So I don't think there's going to be any rate cuts coming until maybe the third quarter. I don't think there's enough data yet to know what it's going to be in the third quarter, but I think there's enough data to know what's going to be in the first and second, simply because we're in the first right now. Inflation is high, but then in the second, even if inflation starts to ramp down, the Fed's going to want to wait and see how the market responds in the coming months, see if inflation could rear its head, and then start to cut. So that's why they're going to be very cautious and see if there's going to be any more influence on inflation rates before they make a formal cut. So that's why I think quarter two is out of the question as well, because that's going to be an acclimation period, and that's the best case scenario if inflation is halted. If inflation is not halted, then third quarter might be out of the question. So that's kind of all I want to cover as far as inflation goes. And one more point I want to make. I think most people that watch this channel understand this, but inflation data isn't pricing data per se. And what I mean by that is when people see that inflation has gone from 9% to 3%, a lot of people think that means it's a drop in prices by 6%, we'll say. That's not how it works. It just means that prices went up by 9%, and then cumulatively they only went up by another 3%. But it's never returning back to that original number. So in other words, if something increased if something cost $5 and increased to $9, but then in the subsequent year only increased to 12, that is a slowing inflation rate, but it's not a deflation rate. So it's not going back to the $5 mark. It's the same difference as kind of acceleration and speed if we were to look at it from a physical standpoint. So that's why the inflation is so damaging, is because it's not only just stopping. It's not like it inflates and then it stops. It's cumulatively increasing every time. So even if the rate of inflation is slowing, the fact that there's still inflation and not deflation means that prices are going to remain high for a while. This stuff is sticky. So that's all I want to cover with inflation. I don't think that's anything new that's been said, but just kind of wanted to clarify. I've got three major stories I want to talk about. The first are kind of just whatever stories, and the third one I think is a pretty powerful one. So the first story is about the Magnificent Seven. These are Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, Meta, Microsoft, NVIDIA, and Tesla. This is a term that was coined, I think, by Jim Cramer. It is funny because I'm not the biggest fan of Jim Cramer. I'm kind of agnostic to him. But a lot of people will bash Jim Cramer, but he always comes up with these catchy names that do kind of control the market. Fang was his. Magnificent Seven was his. So despite the fact that he's constantly criticized and ridiculed in the market, I do think it's funny that he still has pretty powerful sway in how we talk about the market. So the Magnificent Seven are now poised to exceed the GDP of almost every country on Earth. So they just barely, China and Japan just barely squeaked out above the gross revenue of these seven companies combined. But if these companies were a country, they would, one, be the world's largest stock exchange, but two, they would have higher GDPs than most countries on Earth. I don't have a strong opinion on that. I obviously do, but I think that that's a conversation that gets too far into the weeds. I'm just going to throw it out there and leave it there for you guys. The next story I want to talk about is China. I know I talk about China a lot on this channel, and I don't mean to. I try to keep it domestic as much as possible, but I think it is warranted to talk about in this case because I think it warrants, it influences a lot of domestic policy. So China is showcasing their new domestically made jetliner. So China is getting into competition directly with Boeing and with Airbus. So it's touted as the Boeing 737 and Airbus 320 competitor. It's called the Comac C919. It's being showcased at a Singapore Airshow at the end of this week. I think this could actually take off, no pun intended, as a pretty powerful competitor, especially with what's going on with Boeing. Global demand for flights is growing on a daily basis, especially in international flights. So a new entry into the market would definitely be welcome, especially as a lot of people are shying away from Boeing, and rightfully so. This could mean a really, really bad sign for Boeing. This is a sign for Boeing to really get their act together because this is a strong competitor. Now, it could be that this plane isn't that great. I hope that we don't find that out just simply because that could mean a loss of life. But if this plane is a viable alternative to Boeing and Airbus, you could see most of Southeast Asia moving into this area, as well as perhaps other markets that they try to push into, such as Africa, Mexico, South America. The whole Belt and Road Initiative could be a great mechanism to distribute this new plane. So if this plane is viable, if it's safe, if it's reliable, we could be seeing the fact that in the next 5 years, Boeing's market shrinks that much more. If you're a gambling man, you would probably try to short Boeing, and I couldn't say I blame you. The last story I want to talk about could be a secret indicator that nobody is really talking about, and that's tax refunds. So this story is a little bit young, and it's still a little bit premature to make strong judgments off of. But the average refund check for this year is only about $13.95 as of February 2nd. So this data is about 2 weeks old. But that's 29% lower that the refunds were this time last year. So last year they were $19.63. So about almost $600 more last year than they were this year at the same point in time. Now, there are certain refunds that haven't gone out. There's certain child income tax credits and other things that can't be filed until the February actually comes. So these refunds are January refunds. But it's something to keep your eye on. If February refunds come in lower again, I think you could see a slower first and second quarter because of this, because a lot of people rely on refund checks for major expenditures and I would say to a lesser extent towards savings accounts. Some people do, but I feel like this is usually money that is splurged on. So this is how people book vacations. This is how people use down payments for cars. These are your large expenditures. So if the refunds for February come in lower again, I think you could see a slow in a lot of expenditures that are sometimes considered luxury expenditures or outside of basic necessities. So I would warn people to really watch what tax refund season has in store for the next month and make their judgments according to that. I think this is going to be a pretty powerful indicator and one I'm going to keep watching myself. That's pretty much it. That's the major stories of the day. I will see you guys back here tomorrow. I hope you have a productive day. Have a good day.